In January of 1995, Micron announced a decision to invest $2.5 billion in a manufacturing plant in Lehi, Utah. In July, Micron broke ground with the prospect of new jobs and increased tax revenues. At full production, Micron planned to hire 2,000 workers, spend $2.5 billion on plant and equipment, and acquire 500 acres of land and 2 million acre-feet of water in order to produce RAM chips. Like all businesses, Micron invests in order to earn profits. Micron undertook the investment assuming that the cost of land, labor, and capital would be less than the revenue generated from selling computer chips. In other words, Micron expected to increase its profits by investing, buying capital assets and other inputs at one price, and selling its output at a higher price. By January, though, Micron's plans changed. Production stopped, contractors were laid off, and the promises of new, well-paying jobs were put on hold. Well, what happened? In this segment, we're interested in understanding capital and the investment process. What do we mean by investment? How does investment differ from capital? What are the different types of capital? How do profits differ from interest? Why do businesses invest? What factors influence their decisions? And how do business finance their investments? By investment. It seems intuitive, but the concept is a little tricky. If Micron buys plant and equipment to build its Lehi plant, that is considered investment. But if I buy stock in Micron, it's not. Investment in an economic sense is not the same as investment in a personal sense. Many people believe that the purchase of stocks and bonds is investment, and for them it is. They have purchased an asset they hope will yield them a return in the future. But economists don't define investment in terms of what it will do for an individual's income, but rather in terms of what it will do for the productive capacity of the economy. The decision to purchase stocks or bonds may enhance one's personal income, but probably do nothing for the economy as a whole. Why? Because purchasing stocks and bonds in most cases represents a transfer of wealth from one person to another. So purchasing an apartment building or a business may be an investment in a personal sense, but it's not investment in an economic sense. Investment in an economic sense represents expenditures that will enhance the productive capability of the country. A business that builds a new apartment, buys a new machine, or expands its inventories is engaging in investment. If investment represents expenditures on capital, how does investment differ from capital? Investment is nothing more than the change in the capital stock. Depreciation is also a change, but depreciation measures the extent to which capital loses its value from wear and tear. Another way to put the difference between capital and investment is that capital is a stock, whereas investment is a flow. Remember the distinction? A stock is measured at a point in time, a flow is measured over time. Stocks always have flow counterparts. It's just like water in a tub. The flow into the tub is like investment. The water in the tub is the stock, like the capital. And when we pull the drain, the stock goes down. And so it's the same with capital. If investment, the inflow, exceeds depreciation, the outflow, the capital stock rises. And if investment is less than depreciation, the capital stock declines. But what do we mean by the capital stock? What are the different types of capital?
At International Harvester, new furnaces pour out more steel. Military tractors, prime movers, roll faster and faster off Harvester's assembly lines.
Capital goods expand the economy's ability to produce goods and services. But there are different kinds of capital: tangible capital, intangible capital, social capital, and residential construction. Tangible capital refers to physical assets that yield a return over time. Tangible capital includes non-residential construction, durable goods such as machines and inventories. When we focus on business investment, we usually focus on tangible capital. Intangible capital includes things that have value and yield a return but can't be seen. Intangible capital includes such things as a firm's goodwill and human capital. Goodwill, for example, enhances the reputation of the firm. Many companies, for example, have paid attention to developing good customer relations in hopes of increasing their profits. Human capital refers to the skills, knowledge, and abilities produced by economic systems through training and experience, which then become inputs to the production process. Within a business, the computers and the training to use them are both forms of capital. Human capital conveys the idea that businesses invest in workers, or workers may invest in themselves by acquiring education to enhance the value of their labor services, which allows them to earn higher incomes. While human capital is based on an analogy with physical capital, there is a difference. With human capital, you are always present. With physical capital, you don't have to be. You can let your capital do the walking, so to speak. A third type of capital is referred to as social capital. Roads, bridges, dams, and education reduce the costs of doing business. Social capital often has the characteristic of public goods. As we'll see later, public goods are those that are necessary to the economic system but unprofitable for private firms to produce. So investment in social capital is generally left to the government. The time dimension means that capital exists in the present and the future. So the value of capital is the value of the services it provides over time. This brings us to the concept of interest. Why is it that when you put money in the bank or in a certificate of deposit, the bank pays you money for letting them hold it? And when you borrow money for a new car or a college education, why do you have to pay the bank? Well, what's being paid is interest. Interest is the payment that's made for the use of money. The bank is willing to pay interest to you because they can charge entrepreneurs even more interest. And the entrepreneurs are willing to pay the interest because they can receive even a greater return by investing in capital. Let's look at a firm's decision to invest in a new workstation for its offices. The computer system will speed productivity in the office enough to save the company $3,000 a year for the next 4 years until it then becomes obsolete. The system costs $10,000. Now, at first glance, the investment seems like a good one, and the firm would purchase the system. The firm would pay $8,000 for the system and save $12,000 in productivity gains. The decision, however, is not quite so simple. Payment for the system needs to be made right away while the benefits are realized over time. In the first year, the savings amounts to $3,000. The same is true in the second year and in the next and the next. But if the firm had their choice, they would prefer to get all the savings in the first year. Now, why is that? The value of capital is determined by calculating the present value of the income stream it yields over time. But because much of that income stream lies in the future, its value in the present is less than in the future. Now, why is income received in the future worth less than today? To answer this, we need to understand the concepts of interest and discounting. The basics are intuitive. Assume for the moment that I place $1,000 in the bank. What will it be worth a year from now? That depends on the rate of interest. If the interest rate is zero, $1,000 a year from now will be worth the same as $1,000 today. But if that bank pays 5% interest, $1,000 today will be worth $1,050. Well, what if the interest rate is 10%? Then it will be worth $1,100. And if the interest rate is 15%, it will be worth $1,150. This information is shown here. What we see is that the higher the rate of interest, the greater the value.
The segment you are about to watch contains numerous algebraic formulas. Viewer discretion is advised.
Well, there's a simple formula for the relationship. Future value is determined by the present value, value today, times 1 plus the rate of interest, the sum of which is raised to the first power. The power depends on the number of years. It's the first power after 1 year, the second power after 2 years, the third power after 3 years, and so on. The equation is the future value is equal to the present value times 1 plus the interest rate raised to the number of years. But what would happen if we left the money in longer? We can see that since the powers go up with the number of years, future value should rise as well. Well, let's see. Let's assume a 5% interest and see the effect on the future value over time. So far, we've been dealing with future values, the value of $1,000 invested today at some point in the future. Present value uses the same equation, but it works in the opposite direction. Where future value asks what is the value in the future of a sum of money invested today, present value asks what is the value in the present of a sum of money to be received in the future. The present value of $1,050 to be received 1 year from now is $1,000. So $1,000 to be received a year in the future is worth less than the present. In fact, at 5% interest, it's worth $951. If I go in the other direction, I need only to invest $951 today to have $1,000 in the future. The formula for present value is present value is equal to future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the number of years. Well, what happens if the interest rate rises to, say, 10%? The present value of $1,000 received in a year is worth $909. And in other words, I need only invest $909 in the present to have $1,000 a year from now. Well, what does this tell us about the relation between interest rates and present values? The higher the rate of interest, the lower the present value. We can use a slightly more complicated version of the present value formula to tell us about the present value of receiving different amounts of income after the first year, the second year, and so on. In this equation, we see the present value is comprised of a sum of anticipated revenues, R sub 0, R sub 1, R sub 2, and so on. R sub 1, for instance, would be the anticipated revenue 1 year from now, R sub 2, 2 years from now, and so on. They're each divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the corresponding year.
It's time once again for Smart Guy, Dumb Guy.
I just don't get it. I mean, how can $1,000 a year from now be worth less than it is today? You know, a year from now it'll still be $1,000.
But that's just it. You don't have to wait a year for it to be worth $1,000.
So
the point, but the point is that there is time value to money. Look, haven't you ever heard that time is money?
you mean my dad wasn't kidding?
No, he wasn't.
That's a scary thought.
No, he wasn't. Look, the longer you have to wait for something, the lower the value is in the present.
How so? Show me.
Okay. Okay, the formula is that present value, okay, the value of a sum of money today equals its future value divided by 1 plus the rate of interest to the first power.
I hate this math stuff. Like, there's too many numbers. And that power thing?
Oh, look, the power corresponds to the number of years you have to wait. Okay, if it's 1 year, it's 1 power. If it's 2 years, that would be 2 power, and and so on.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Okay, well, 1 plus the interest rate to the first power is on the denominator. Okay, so the more years, the larger the power, the bigger the number on the denominator will be, the lower the present value.
So what's this denominator thing again?
That's the number on the bottom of the fraction. The top number is called the numerator.
What about the interest rate?
Oh, same thing. The larger the interest rate, the larger the denominator, the smaller the present value.
That sucks.
Well, not necessarily. Look, if the present value is low, then, look, by buying that asset, you can watch your money grow quite rapidly.
Hey, it's like a garden.
Well, yeah, only better. You don't have to worry about the weather.
So give me an example.
Okay. Okay, say you receive $1,000 in a year, and the interest rate is 5%. What's the present value?
Okay, let's see. It would be $1,000 divided by 1 plus 0.05 to the first power. Mm-hmm. So it would be like $1,000 divided by 1.05. So what's that?
It's about $950.
Cool! Wait till I tell my old man. I just figured out a way to make money without working.
There's only one problem.
What?
First, you got to have some money.
So how do I do that?
You ever think about getting a job?
Why do you think I'm in school?
Okay, now what does all this have to do with business investment? Remember, businesses invest to earn a profit. So they earn profits by making sure that their revenues exceed their costs. There are two ways that businesses decide whether or not to invest. First, businesses must get an idea of the cost of their investments. In Micron's case, the costs involve the land, the water, costs of new construction, machinery, and so on. There are also other costs that Micron would want to consider: taxes, labor costs, and so forth. Once Micron has an idea of its costs, it wants to estimate the income generated from the plant. More precisely, it wants to know the present value of the future income stream generated by the Lehigh facility. If the present value exceeds the costs, the firm invests. If the present value equals the costs, the firm is indifferent. But if the present value is less than the cost, the firm does not invest. At the time Micron began building its Lehigh facility, computer chip prices were hovering around $120 for 4 megabytes. Based on those prices and their stability over the years, Micron estimated that the present value exceeded the cost of the investment. So then what happened? Computer sales softened, competition in the computer chip business increased, and Micron found that it had overestimated the present value of its future income stream. With chip prices down 70% from when Micron broke ground, the investment was no longer profitable. The present value was less than the cost. A second way of determining whether to invest depends on comparing the market interest rate with the rate of return on the investment, and that's sometimes called the marginal efficiency of investment. The marginal efficiency of investment is that rate of discount, or the interest, that makes the present value of an investment equal to its cost. Think of the marginal efficiency of investment as the profits divided by the cost of the investment. The higher the present value of the investment, the higher the marginal efficiency of investment required to equate present value with cost. If the marginal efficiency of investment is greater than the interest rate, the firm should invest. Its return is greater by investing itself than putting its money in the bank, for example. If the marginal efficiency of investment is equal to the interest rate, the firm's indifferent. And if the marginal efficiency of investment is less than the interest rate, the firm should not invest. Well, we can demonstrate this as follows. Assume for the moment that Micron has three choices: build a plant in Malaysia, yielding a return of 20%, expand its Boise plant, yielding a return of 10%, or finish its Utah plant, yielding a return of 5%. Assume further that the market rate of interest is 10%. This means that should Micron borrow, it would have to pay 10%, or if it placed its money in the bank, it could earn 10%. On the vertical axis, we have two variables: the marginal efficiency of investment and the rate of interest. On the horizontal axis, we have the different investments that Micron is confronted with and their associated costs. Note that the Malaysia investment has a marginal efficiency of investment of 20%, while the interest rate is only 10%. Why is the return so good? Because labor is cheaper than in the United States, and the Malaysian government will build the building and provide Micron the land for free. The marginal efficiency of investment for the Boise plant is only 10%, which is the same as if Micron placed the money in the bank. And the marginal efficiency of the investment for the Lehigh plant is only 5%, substantially below the return in Malaysia and below the rate of interest. Clearly, Micron should not build the Lehigh plant. We can eliminate the steps in our graph and derive our typical investment function. The horizontal distance between the investment function and the horizontal axis shows the marginal efficiency of investment, or the rate of return. Given an interest rate, determining the level of investment is simply a matter of finding where the marginal efficiency of investment equals the rate of interest. This is the point of equilibrium. To the left, marginal efficiency exceeds the rate of interest and businesses will invest. To the right of equilibrium, businesses find that the marginal efficiency of investment is less than the rate of interest, and they'll cut back. So to a large degree, interest rates determine the level of investment. A rising interest rate reduces investment. Businesses find the cost of borrowing too high relative to the returns. And falling interest rates encourage investment, since businesses find the cost of borrowing less than their returns. But there are other factors that come into play too. One of the most important is expectations.
Here come the bids. Half on 3K.
No, local
70 bid now. Pay 60. All right, 70 bid. Yeah, come on now. Buy one. 80 bid now. 90 bid now.
There are some other factors which come into play in whether or not the firm decides to invest. The value of future payments is greatly affected by the inflation rate. It isn't just that we could invest money and earn a return on it that makes us want to receive cash now, but also the fact that the cash may be worth less in the future because the buying power of money is less. For instance, if the inflation rate is 5%, then $100 worth of goods this year will cost $105 next year.
And now it's time for Chalk Talk with your host, Miss Sarah.
Now we're going to look at the present discounted value for a purchase that we're making today that is going to yield us income in the future. For example, if we buy some machinery that's going to give us $100 a year from now, as well as $100 2 years from now, we want to know how much that's worth today so we can decide whether or not to buy it. Let's assume we have an interest rate or a discount rate of 10%. What we do to find the discounted present value is divide this first year income times 1 plus the discount rate. You divide the second year income times 1 plus the discount rate, but you're going to square it because you're going to do that for 2 years. You add those two together, and that will give you the present discounted value. So this number comes out to be 90.9. This number, 82.6, for a total of 173.5. So this 173.5 tells us how much that $100 a year from now and the $100 2 years from now is worth today. So if we were deciding to buy this machine, we wouldn't pay more than $173 for that.
If a business does decide to invest, then there's another decision, how to pay for it. And there are various options. First, the firm may use its retained earnings. Retained earnings are the profits that the business has retained instead of paying them to stockholders. Because the firm has the cash at hand, this can be a cheap source of financing, but it's not without a price. Remember, every decision has its opportunity costs. In using retained earnings, the firm forgoes the interest it could have earned by loaning the money out. Second, the firm may turn to venture capitalists. Venture capitalists have money that they are willing to invest in return for ownership in the business. Third, the firm may issue stock. Stocks, of course, are certificates of ownership. Or fourth, the firm may issue debt, that is, may borrow from the financial markets. So how do the financial and capital markets work? A capital market is comprised of households, firms, and financial intermediaries, such as banks, insurance companies, and so on. In general, households save by placing their money in the bank. Firms go to the bank seeking to borrow the savings of households for investment purposes. The supply curve represents the savings of households, and the demand curve represents the willingness of firms to borrow for investment purposes. The intersection of the supply and demand for these funds is the interest rate. As we saw earlier, a high interest rate reduces the present value, so there's an inverse relationship between the interest rate and the demand for savings. At the same time, a high interest rate means you get more of a return on funds which you lend out. So there's a positive relationship between the interest rates and future value. So there's likely to be a positive relationship between the interest rate and the supply of savings. We can now take a look at the difference between interest and profit. Interest rates may be defined in two ways depending on your point of view. As a saver or creditor, interest is the price paid to induce you to give up use of your money. As a debtor, though, interest is the price paid for borrowing money. The interest rate is the percentage of the loan paid in interest. For example, if I borrow $1,000 agreeing to pay interest of $100 a year, then the interest is 10%. Profits, on the other hand, are revenues in excess of costs. Interest is the price paid for money, the terms of which are usually stated in a contract. The contractual obligation reduces the uncertainty that the creditor will not be paid. Profits, on the other hand, are much less certain because the revenues that entrepreneurs receive are subject to market conditions. In other words, the profits accruing to entrepreneurs are often subject to the whims of consumers. Both profit and interest, though, serve important functions in the capitalist system. Profit is the reward for organizing production, introducing innovations, and taking risks. Many argue that risk and innovation form the essence of the capitalist system, a system that's efficient in creating new technologies and an ever-increasing menu of goods and services. In the next segments, we'll explore efficiency in more detail. We'll see what can go right in markets and what can go wrong.